What is up, my Squirtleites? It is I, your king. Today, I want to talk about Ghost of Tsushima, and I know I'm about a month late to the party, but I have some good reasons for doing that. I still haven't beaten the game, I should mention, but before I get into the game itself, I want to ask, how have y'all been doing? How has your year been going so far? I haven't really done any sort of personal videos aside from the mental health one from a couple weeks ago this year. Nothing, asking people how they are and, how's life treating you guys? I hope things are going well. I hope that things are on the up and up if they haven't been going well. Those sorts of things. It's been a crazy summer for me. We had a system change at work, which has totally slowed down the entire process, so that's been a lot of fun. And it's been hot this summer, man. Super hot. Speaking in terms of Fahrenheit, because I'm obviously a filthy American, it's been, usually around here, the hottest it ever gets in the summer is about 94, 95 degrees. So in Celsius, that would be 35 degrees Celsius. And we've had probably a good 6 or 7 days this summer that have been over 100. So that would be 38 degrees Celsius. Really, really hot summer. And my job almost exclusively has me work outside. I don't work inside all that often, but for the most part, I'm outside all day, hauling stuff around by hand, lifting lots of things and, just working my butt off in the heat. And I mean, honestly, I've just been exhausted. I mean, that on top of the fact that I work 5, 10 to 11 hour shifts a week, if not longer on some days. And then I've been trying to keep up with this channel. And then I've been having other things that have been going on in the middle of all this. And then, of course, there's been, obviously the pandemic situation has caused some issues. And then trying to, fit in some writing and things like that because I've been trying to work on a book and, all these different things. I haven't had a whole lot of time to play video games, which is ironic because I know for a lot of people, they've never had so much time to play video games. But this year has been very difficult for me finding the time to do that. I made time for Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Of course, I had to make time for that. And then I Let's Played it again, and it was wonderful both times. But other than that, I've only just in the last couple of weeks gotten around to start working on my backlog, aside from what I'm already doing on the channel. But going into the year, there was one other game besides the Ori sequel that I absolutely knew I had to try unless, of course, the reviews came out and they were, overwhelmingly negative, which, of course, they weren't. And that was Ghost of Tsushima. Now, I did go into this game with a few misgivings, I should say, both based on preview material and review material. I was a little bit worried about a few aspects of this game, and I'm sure a lot of other people have been as well, especially because this is one of those few instances where audience reception has been overwhelmingly higher than the critic reception, while the critic reception has already been generally favorable. That doesn't happen very often in video games. Usually, if the game is extremely good, the audience and the critics are right on the same level, or the game is good and then the audience absolutely, blasts the game and then they call the reviewers shills, or it's the other way around where the reviewers don't give it very good scores and the audience is like, what are you talking about? It's a masterpiece. This is a game that is kind of neither of those things. It got pretty darn good reviews. I think, obviously I don't want to quote Metacritic scores because those are meaningless, but generally favorable critical reviews across the board. But the fan reception for this game has been on another level. People adore this game. In fact, I've actually seen the sentiment a lot that this is one of, if not the very best game that the PlayStation 4 ever got, which, is kind of fitting considering the fact that this is the last first-party exclusive for the PlayStation 4 leading up to the PlayStation 5. At least I believe it is, the first high-profile one. And this game is developed by Sucker Punch, which was immediately one of my first misgivings about the project. In that, of all of Sony's high-profile first-party developers, like Insomniac and Naughty Dog and, all those sorts of companies, Sucker Punch is the one that's never really grasped me. I played Rocket Robot on Wheels on the Nintendo 64. It was fine. I never really got to play the Sly Cooper games all that much, and I've been told I've been missing out on that, so I need to get around to it. I do own them. I just need to play them. And then Infamous, I couldn't get into at all. Infamous very much falls in the same category as a lot of open-world games, where I find it painfully generic, I guess is the nicest way I can put it. Open-world games are so hit or miss for me. And it usually comes down to one fundamental, crucial aspect of the game that either makes it or breaks it. And usually it's the gameplay itself. It's almost never the story or the graphics or the lore or any of that crap. The actual combat, the platforming, the controls, those things need to be foundationally solid for me to enjoy my time throughout the rest of the game. This is why I'm a huge fan of games like Horizon Zero Dawn and Spider-Man and Sunset Overdrive, and to a slightly lesser extent Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. And I'm not so fond of games like Red Dead Redemption and Grand Theft Auto and pretty pretty much every Ubisoft open world game. They have a lot of good aspects to them, but the most important aspect is the thing that's most lacking, and therefore it drags the entire game down to mediocrity for me, from my perspective. Because when you really get down to it and you strip away just the combat elements, almost all those open world games are the exact freaking same as one another. It really is that singular aspect that kind of separates them from the rest. And thankfully, now that I've spent almost 6 minutes rambling about a bunch of other stuff, I can finally say that Ghost of Tsushima is absolutely one of the better ones. Oh my goodness, it is so much fun. It just so bad ass. Like, that's something I really want to drive home about this game. I have never played a game that just makes you feel such a semblance of I am a badass than this game. Way more than any difficult video game I've ever played. And this game is somewhat difficult. I wouldn't say it's on the upper echelons of challenging, but it's much more challenging than most video games out there, especially AAA video games, because so many of those dumb their difficulty down so much. It is an awesome, awesome game. And I should also mention that I'm not a fan of sword combat either. At least the slow, plodding, methodical sword combat in most games, like For Honor or the older traditional 3D Legend of Zeldas or the Souls-like games. I've never really been a fan of that combat. If there's a sword in my character's hand, I typically like it to be very fast-paced, like, well, anything Platinum's ever made, or Devil May Cry, you know, those sorts of games. And Ghost of Tsushima is not that. But on the flip side, I would also say that it's a lot more fast-paced than other games where it's more focused. It's more one-on-one centric. Ghost of Tsushima is a masterclass in combat variety. While giving you a very simple, fundamental combat system with which to understand, it throws enough at you that you are going to be experiencing something completely different in every single encounter you have in the entire game. And you will have encounters very frequently. I mean, that really is the core of the game, is just constant combat sequences of varying degrees, and you deciding how you want to set up those combat sequences, if there's a bunch of enemies or if there's just one enemy, and how you want to play it out and what sort of tools you want to use that you have at your disposal. And that's really the core essence of the game at all times. I mean, it actually does remind me a lot of Horizon Zero Dawn in that way, although Horizon Zero Dawn was obviously much more range-focused, and Ghost of Tsushima is much more melee-focused. You know, actually, another very good comparison, I would say, is Middle-earth, particularly Shadow of Mordor, you know, the good one, not Shadow of War. Where, yes, you're going to have these one-on-one encounters where it's all about, you know, parrying your opponent's attacks at the right time, or dodging them correctly, or, you know, being set up in the right combat stances and things like that. But at the same time, more often than not, you're going to be going into a situation where there's an overwhelming amount of enemies to deal with, and if you don't handle it properly, you're going to get your butt kicked. But you have a lot of things, you know, in your arsenal and also in your surroundings that you can use to your advantage, and you can strategize and approach it however you want, whether it's through stealth or whether it's just the straight-up face-off approach, which Ghost of Tsushima heavily rewards that latter play style, which I like because a lot of open world games very heavily encourage the usage of stealth. In fact, that's always been one of my biggest criticisms about a lot of open world games, is that you can, you know, they always give you the option, you can just go headfirst into a battle and try to win, although it's going to be much harder, but you're always encouraged to stealth your way through, kill as many enemies as silently as possible. And while Ghost of Tsushima certainly gives you that option, and it is still very powerful, it actually can be, in certain circumstances, just as good to literally just walk up, knock on the front door, and say, hey, come out and fight me, because of the standoff mechanic. Ghost of Tsushima has this mechanic where you can walk up to a group of enemies, engage in a standoff, you say, come and fight me, and then it's basically a game of, oh, what's the simplest thing I could think of? Do you remember in Kirby Superstar, you know, there was that reaction time game where you were supposed to hit the button faster than the other to beat the opponent? Very similar to that, actually, but it's more about, as soon as your opponent starts to strike, you have to get them. If you strike first, you will be knocked all the way down to like 1 HP, and then you'll have to start the fight that way. That's your penalty. But if you do it right, you get a free kill. And you can also upgrade the standoff mechanic to get multiple free kills. And, you know, it can also get other bonuses that'll, you know, play off of this even further, which is awesome. You know, it gives you this huge advantage to start in the fight because, oh, look at that. With the standoff, I just took out 3, 4, 5 enemies right from the get-go, and now I actually have an overwhelming advantage, and I can back up and, you know, get ready with my bow and arrow and take out a few guys as they run at me and whatnot. And almost everything good I have to say about this game has to do with the combat itself. If you come into this game looking for like a really, really good story, I honestly don't think you're going to find that here. I wouldn't say that Ghost of Tsushima's story is bad, but you can tell. So we're certainly in an age of video games right now where super serious and sort of dour, almost edgy sorts of stories, which were very, very popular, back in the PlayStation 2, Xbox days, and even more so actually on the 360 and PS3. We're kind of in an age now where people prefer more colorful games, lighthearted, silly games that have a good sense of humor, that don't take themselves too seriously. Ghost of Tsushima is not that. It takes itself very seriously, extremely so, but it does so in the same vein as a lot of really old Japanese films, think Seven Samurai, the 1954 film, not any of the remakes or the parodies or any of that stuff. I'm talking about the original story. It's very much based on stories like that, where, yes, there is, the rare moment of comedy, and actually more often than not, that'll usually come from the gameplay itself. It is a pretty darn serious story. And something that I saw a lot in reviews was that people were comparing this game specifically to Assassin's Creed. There's a lot of open world games to compare other open world games too. This one got a lot of Assassin's Creed comparisons. And in a way, I actually would agree with that. And I hate Assassin's Creed. I cannot stand that series. The only game I ever enjoyed in that entire series, even remotely, was Black Flag. And that was only due to the few hours of not Assassin's Creed that you got to play in that game, particularly revolving around the ship combat. That was pretty much all I got out of that game that I actually enjoyed to some extent. I can't stand that series, but I would agree with that sentiment to a degree, because much like Assassin's Creed, it is a serious open world period piece. In the most general of terms, I can definitely see the comparisons there, but it's so much better. It's vastly superior. Now, another thing that I often will praise certain open world games for doing right is taking a lot of tropes, a lot of stereotypes across open world games, and slightly twisting them or subverting them. Like a good example, again, let's go back to Horizon Zero Dawn. Every freaking open world game ever has high places that you have to climb with your character, and once you get to the top, you get more of the fog around the map goes away, and it allows you to see the surrounding area a lot better because you've downloaded map data or you've surveyed the area or whatever. But Horizon Zero Dawn had a really cool twist on it in that those towers were alive and moving, and there was usually a very complex puzzle. Well, okay, not very complex, but a very interesting or intriguing puzzle most of the time to figure out how to get on said towers or how to time your jump properly and get up on it and whatnot. It was a living, breathing creature, which it's not a huge difference, but it was something. It was something like, oh, this is intriguing. And it also didn't require you to do it so many times that you just got sick of it by the end. There wasn't 50 of these towers throughout the game. There was 6. So that, that's subverting expectations right there. That's actually making an improvement while using the exact same trope that other games have. I mean, on the flip side, I can also criticize Horizon Zero Dawn because I think it did its bandit camps, which every open world game ever has. It did those very poorly. They were extremely generic and really not all that exciting whatsoever. I mean, it was literally just a camp and you shoot all the bandits inside and then you were done. That's really all it took. There was a slightly interesting quest associated with it, but other than that, I mean, it was no different than any other game. Ghost of Tsushima actually doesn't do a whole lot of these really, really well, and I think this is where the game's presentation and just how gorgeous. I'm playing this on a basic PS4. I don't have a PS4 Pro, and this game is still amazing. It looks more beautiful than anything I've ever seen, even on my PC. It's just gorgeous. Certainly, yes, I wish I was playing in 60 FPS with the performance mode on PS4 Pro, but as far as just the pure visuals go and just the art direction of the game, oh, it's magnificent. You've been seeing it for yourself throughout this entire video. What a beautiful, beautiful looking game. And I think that does come into play in a lot of these certain situations where you come across these, very generic locations that ask you to do a lot of the same things that other games ask you to do. Although, I will say the bandit camps, quote unquote, in this game are actually handled very well whenever you come across Mongol territory in Ghost of Tsushima. More often than not, they can be pretty interesting locations, especially the more fleshed out ones. There's usually these little mini ones that only have a dozen or so enemies in them, and then there's these bigger ones that will have anywhere up between 20 to 40 enemies in them. And usually those latter ones can actually make for some very interesting encounters, obviously, because if you do something wrong, you will get overwhelmed very quickly, and fighting your way out of that it's ridiculously difficult. I mean, did I mention that this game can actually be kind of hard? It's very punishing if you don't have the combat system down right. I mean, I was dying very frequently for probably the first 6 hours of the game, and I would say only now am I staving off death and only dying maybe like once a play session now. Like, this game can get pretty freaking hard, but I digress. As far as other locations are concerned, you know, that you'll find throughout the open world, a lot of them aren't really all that different from other open world locations. Like, there are places you have to climb. And instead of getting, you know, like surveying the map around you, you'll get like a little prize at the top, which I guess is slightly different. I actually think that's the weakest aspect of the game, not because that the locations themselves are designed poorly, but because the platforming is the worst aspect of Ghost of Tsushima. It's very sluggish and sometimes doesn't control all that well. And the main character, the protagonist, he can sometimes get caught on weird jumps. Like, you'll have him jump up to something, but then he'll like launch himself up at like a very strange angle and then just completely miss the only platform he could have possibly been aiming for and then fall to his death. I've had that happen a few times on me in this game, and it's a little frustrating. It's like, it reminds me very much of like the first Uncharted's climbing controls at times, which is not good, not very good at all. But I mean, I also kind of give it the benefit of the doubt because that's not really what your character's supposed to be. He's not supposed to be this super nimble acrobat. He's wearing, I mean, more, at least when I play the game, he's always wearing this super heavy samurai armor, and I can't imagine he's too nimble with that on. But I digress. And the other locations, I mean, they're pretty darn simple and generic. Like, there's these hot tubs where you get to go and get a little health increase when you sit in them and meditate on things, and you get a nice shot of the main character's completely naked ass for like 2 seconds, which I guess that's the highlight of it. And then there's these little dens where you're supposed to follow these foxes to a little shrine to get a little bonus. Those are very cute, but that's because I'm a sucker for foxes. But other than that, they're very simple. You just follow the fox, and that's really all there is to it. And they only take you like, you know, on this short like minute or two jaunt. And then I guess the best part of that is then after you get the bonus, you get to pet the fox sometimes if the fox doesn't disappear afterwards. And that's pretty great. Trying to think of other things in the game. Oh, you can write haikus. They'll give you like 3 different options for each line in the haiku that you can then put in, and all you get out of it is a vanity item. You don't get anything like that'll help you with gameplay, but they're these nice little scenes with beautiful visuals. Something that the game is very good at, I should mention, is the way it frames itself. Not just the gameplay camera, but a lot of times whenever the characters are having like dialogue moments, or even when you're like starting a quest and it needs to, you know, it takes like a shot. Like, it somehow always manages to frame any of its actual camera shots, you know, independent of the player, in the most beautiful way possible. And these haiku scenes are a great example of that. Again, the old movie feel of this game is very prevalent throughout. And because the visuals and the landscapes are so unbelievably gorgeous, I mean, this game, it just never misses. And then there'll be the one-on-one showdowns, which those are always pretty cool. I will say that if you were playing them all like back to back to back to back, it would get a little stale after a while, because a lot of the one-on-one encounters, especially the less meaningful ones, the ones against like one-off characters that aren't extremely important to the story, they can feel almost the exact same because their fighting style is the exact same and you know exactly how to handle it every single time. But because they're usually, you know, so well spaced out, and again, the framing and the way that those fights are set up is just so freaking cool. Like, again, if they were back to back, they would get stale, but because they aren't, they're awesome. They're so freaking fun. And again, they just make you feel like an utter badass when you beat them. And they can be very punishing, too. If you so much as make like 3 mistakes in a row, you're done. Your fight's over. It's very, very easy to go down in this game if you aren't careful, which is actually a big reason why I have been taking my time through this game so much. Again, I said at the beginning of the video, I haven't finished this game. I want to say about 30 or so hours in, and I'm about 2/3 of the way through the game. That's because rather than, you know, just going through the story to see how it ends first, or going through the story and then going back to the side quests, I've been taking a no stone unturned approach throughout this game, where like each act of the game is in separate areas of the island of Ghost of Tsushima. Spoilers. Not really, because that's made kind of plainly evident right at the beginning of the game. But I have been, you know, focusing on, once I get through, like I'm in an area, I am clearing everything in that area, whether it's story, side quests, side locations, every single thing in that area before I move on to the next act. That's the way I've been approaching this game, and it's been very, very rewarding. But it's also made it so that I might be a little more overpowered than I'm supposed to be. But like I said, even then, I'm still finding myself dying on occasion because of lapses in judgment or big mistakes that I've ended up making. And I mean, and I'm not even playing on the hardest difficulty. I'm playing on, what difficulty am I playing on? I can't remember if it's normal or hard. All I know is it's not the hardest difficulty, and I'm still getting my butt whooped. I mean, certainly less than before. This game has a learning curve to it. If you have never played games like this, it's going to take you a little while to get the hang of it, I would assume, unless I just suck at these sorts of games, and that's the only reason it took me as long as it did. But it can be tricky, but it is certainly rewarding. If this game had come out pretty much any other year since the PlayStation 4 launched, I probably would have given it my game of the year. I mean, maybe not 2015, but, you know, well, I mean, it's up there. It's really good. Of all the games that have come out in this last console generation, really the only games that I can think that I have for sure enjoyed more than this one have been the 2 Ori games, maybe Doom, and then I don't know. I'm having a very hard time picking between this one and Horizon Zero Dawn. I think I like Horizon's combat flow more, and also I think the implications of it a little bit more, like the fact that you're fighting giant robot dinosaurs, like killing bandits has got nothing on that. Like, don't get me wrong, Ghost of Tsushima is a badass game, but that's something that no other game can attest to, and it is a really great feeling fighting those sorts of things. But in almost every other way, I think Ghost of Tsushima has it beat, and I don't want to directly compare them too much because, you know, in a lot of ways they are similar, but also in a lot of ways they're completely different. So I don't really feel like if you enjoyed Horizon, you're automatically going to enjoy Ghost of Tsushima and vice versa. But I personally, those are my 2 favorite exclusives that the PlayStation 4 has ever gotten. So that's why I'm actually comparing the 2. But this is a fantastic game. It's so good. It's so good, and I actually can't wait to keep playing more. It's hit this point where it's taken up all of my free time. And again, like I said, I haven't had a lot of free time to play this game, that I have to take breaks with it every now and then. So I have no idea when I'm going to finish this, but I can't recommend it enough, guys. I seriously can't. It is such a great time. It is so interesting, and it is so beautiful to look at. Like, I'm obviously a sucker for this aesthetic. Okami is my favorite game of all time, and the over-romanticized Japanese culture within the game, like the aesthetic of all of that, obviously I love it. That's a big part of why I love that game. And, you know, it's no exception here. The cherry blossoms and the Shinto architecture, like, that stuff is just, it is gorgeous to me. It's gorgeous to me. And, like, I can't tell you how badly I want to visit Japan someday if I ever get the chance to do that. That is, like, right on the top of my bucket list of places to visit, because they have such a beautiful, beautiful landscape. It's such a beautiful place. And yes, I get that this game, like I said, over-romanticizes it, but I still love it. I absolutely do. I think it's beautiful, and if you're into that kind of thing, I can't recommend this game enough. I seriously can't. So that's pretty much all I have to say on Ghost of Tsushima. This was a very casual, informal discussion video where I just kind of rambled for the entirety of it, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. And I hope that, to reiterate what I said at the beginning of the video, I hope you're all doing all right. I hope things are going okay. I hope that the summer has been treating you guys well, that quarantine and this whole pandemic situation hasn't been hitting y'all too hard. And this is exactly why I've been continuing to try to upload, is so that you guys have something to take your mind off of things. Even though I am fully aware of the fact that I am not the most entertaining Let's Player ever, I hope that at least I'm providing a good distraction, I guess is the best way that I could put it. So thank you all so very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this video very, very much, and I will see you all in the next one.